Sometimes I feel like technology has taken over classrooms and inhibits what teachers are able to teach or inhibits their students learning deeply. I know them's fighting words in our tech-savvy and tech-addicted world. Well, I stand behind it. Keep listening to hear how and why to change your teaching to use technology as a tool, to use it most effectively and seriously for deep learning, and then when to put it away. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. And this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. I have this cartoon that I cut out of the newspaper years ago, long before technology took over teaching, back when computers were a tool, not a necessity in the classroom. It's one frame. There are students sitting at desks with laptops in front of them working. Near the doorway, there are 3 people in suits. The caption says, "If we set them in front of computers and test them all day, we won't need teachers anymore." I think about this cartoon a lot. Sometimes it sure feels like this in the classroom today. Testing is rampant, and weeks of school are often dedicated to test prep. In many classrooms I visit, the students spend at least half the day on programs like iReady and Dreambox. There is hardly any time to really teach. It's easy to get attached to programs that seem to be teaching students important skills and making our lives easier. These programs level, self-grade, track, and assign next steps. But are they really teaching our students? Is it really important that our students know every single detail that are in these programs? Are students actually able to apply any of this information to real reading and real writing, or is it only valuable to them in this particular instance, on the program or in isolation? Well, there can be a lot of good things with these programs. There's also a lot of bad. Guessing parents can overhelp if they're working on them at home. Students can get frustrated and not know how to solve the problem. And quite honestly, they can be working in a level that they haven't actually been taught anything about. They're figuring it out on their own. There can be wrong learning or learning but lacking in important skills like actually writing and reading with enjoyment and stamina. They don't teach them how to apply this information in real and deep ways. Okay, now you know why I don't like these programs. Do I think they're a complete waste of time? No, there absolutely is benefit to using these programs, but you need to use them in a very directed and careful manner. I'm sure you've heard this expression before, but I think it's really an important one. Every yes is a no to something else. So when we say yes to the time with these programs, we're saying no to time doing other things. What are you saying no to? What are you giving up? What are we giving up for our students? I promise that you're giving up something. We are always pushed for time, trying to grab more time and find more time in our day to teach all the things. And quite often, things like science and history are the things that are given up. So what are we giving up? What are we saying no to when we're saying yes to spending time on these programs? Are you spending less time teaching science and social studies? Are you giving up writing time? I can't tell you how often I get into classrooms and students hardly write all day long. It's pretty hard to learn how to write well if you don't actually practice writing every single day. So today, take a few minutes and think about it. What are you giving up when you're spending time on these programs? What are your students not getting? And then decide, is it worth it? I'm not saying don't use these programs. I'm just saying, let's make conscious decisions about what we're spending our time on so that our students are getting maximum benefit. Our goal isn't that our students learn to use these programs and that they learn how to do all these little particular things. It's that they learn to read and write better. Like everything I believe in, moderation, moderation, moderation. And that holds true for using technology in your classroom as well. And I do believe that all of this electronic and screen time makes kids more aggressive, less forgiving, and less tolerant. And I have seen it with my own children. Way back before computers were a one-to-one thing, even a thought of a one-to-one thing in the classroom. I remember my oldest son, whenever there was a day when I was sick or not feeling well, If I let him watch a little bit too much TV, I saw it in his behaviors. He was more aggressive, less forgiving, less tolerant. He didn't connect as well with the rest of us. And I have to say, I see the same thing with students. The more time they spend on electronics, the more aggression I see in the classroom. When the balance is off in our classrooms between doing physical work and technology use, it shows up in subtle and yet important ways. An overabundance of screen time strips our classrooms of what makes our classrooms so special, and that's that interpersonal connection and communication between all of us, between our teacher and student to student. We're made for connection, and when we strip that out by sitting on screens, we're taking away one of the most important parts of our classroom. And I know you don't always feel like you have a choice because so many schools and districts require time on these programs, don't they? You are required to have your students do some of these things. How do you manage that and still grab time to actually really teach and connect with your students? In order to grab back more teaching time, sometimes we need to look at our schedule and see if there's ways that we can find large periods of time to turn the electronics off so that we can teach and work as a class. The more time we can gain to teach and work as a class, the better. Plan your tech use carefully. Think about it. What is your purpose? What is the reason that this technology is important in this particular lesson? If you can't think of a reason why this technology is so important, then it probably isn't. Think, is this the best way for students to learn this? Is this particular program or this particular movie, this particular app, the best way for students to learn how to do this particular thing? Is it the best way for them to learn about nouns and verbs? Is it the best way to learn about how to read? Is it the best way for them to practice their math facts? It might be the best way for them to practice something. If it is, that's great. But if it's not the best way, just check yourself and check what you're doing. Some of the best ways to use technology is to review items that need to be kept current. Essentially, it's intermittent practice. So practice of things in math that you have taught previously that you want students to go back and review and practice, that can be a great use of technology. Practice with certain types of comprehension questions. That can be a great use of technology. Collaborative work, it can be done wonderfully with technology. There's great programs for students to be able to collaborate and work on something together. Writing an essay in 3rd grade and up is very appropriate using technology. But even with these uses, quite often, students need to have done some backup work prior to jumping on the computer. I firmly believe that anything new that a student is learning needs to be taught by the teacher. If you've given a lesson and then you have students that are going to practice something that you've taught and you've worked on together, having students work on that, especially working in pairs to complete something or to work on something or to show how they know on the computer, can be a fabulous use of computers. We can use Jamboard, we can use all kinds of fabulous things in order for students to get creative in showing us what they know. There are wonderful uses for technology. If you really must let your students get their district or school required minutes in on a program, plan time for just that once a day and then walk away from the programs. Better yet, if you can assign specific lessons in the programs for students to use that go along directly with what you've just taught, that becomes one piece of your lesson for practice and follow-up, and it's so much more efficient and more effective for your students. This would use your technology for its best advantage for you and for your students. And that's always a win. If you're required to use a certain amount of technology in your lessons, and I've seen this in many districts, find ways for students to collaborate, for students to work on something interesting, and to show how they know using the computer instead of just filling out forms or doing drill and skill. There's so many better ways to use technology and use it effectively for real thinking and real learning. If your students have to apply what they've learned in a way that requires them to think deeply and synthesize the information, then you're on the right track. All right, a quick recap. Some questions to think about. What are your students really gaining by this use of technology? If you can answer that and be proud of what they're gaining, keep going. What are you giving up? Are you giving up actual teaching time? Are you giving up time for them to write? Are you giving up that science experiment? You might not think you're giving up anything, but I promise you, you are. What's your purpose? What is the purpose of this technology in your lesson? Is there a reason for it? Is it the very best way for your students to learn this material? Or is it just a way for students to learn this material? Are you checking a box in order for them to be able to use this? Yes, I use technology in this lesson. Or, yes, my students got their required minutes in. Is there a better way that you could do that? Make sure you have plenty of time with all the screens turned off in your classroom. The more we can turn the screens off, the more your students will connect and become a class. Now, I know your students aren't plugged into screens all day long, but sometimes it can feel that way to a student. And it doesn't mean that they would complain, but if they really thought about it, it's not making them very happy. But we know that interpersonal connection and multisensory learning is the way to go whenever we can. If at all possible, plan your required tech time into blocks of each day or week so that your students can get in their required minutes and you can contain the time that your students are staring at screens. That gives you larger blocks of time to really teach and connect, to think and to learn together. And let me make one more push, and that is silence. Silence is restful. It's restful for the brain. It's restful for your students. I know they might actually be uncomfortable with silence for a while because they're not used to it, but it is good for them. In the long run, it will help them to be calmer, more kind, more generous, and more centered in themselves as well. I've got a cheat sheet for you. You can grab that in the show notes. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for those of you who have taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts, or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.